The negotiations with Iran over the weekend were honestly extremely tense. Both sides talked for 2 days, so did it work out or not? Today, I'll give you the latest and most accurate update. Also, the British Prime Minister is in trouble, and in South America, Colombia is experiencing a major shift. And it's not just Colombia, but 9 countries are going through big changes. So what exactly is going on? Also, Gabbard has released an accusation against Fauci. So what really happened with the pandemic 6 years ago? Today, I'll bring you the latest report on that. Welcome to another episode of Good Morning America with Feng Wen. Hello to all our viewers on YouTube. Hello to all the listeners of Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. All right, let's get straight to the point and talk about the latest developments. Honestly, the situation over the weekend was really tense. If you watched Feng Wei and Jin Tian's Tianfeng Ye Tan show last night, you'd know what I mean. Actually, on Friday, Israel and Hezbollah reached a ceasefire agreement, but that very night, the ceasefire was broken. Hezbollah launched rocket attacks against Israel throughout the night, and Israel didn't hold back. They immediately struck back. By Saturday, Iran announced that it would threaten to close the strait. President Trump immediately responded by posting several tweets threatening Iran. At this point, Vance had just arrived at this place called, in Switzerland, what's it called, Bergenstock? Bergenstock, this resort, for negotiations. Iran gave Vance the cold shoulder right there, refusing to shake hands or even show their faces, and just turned around and left. So this also became a major focus of discussion and commentary among many independent media outlets yesterday. But regardless, the negotiations still began, and surprisingly, after the first day, they didn't fall apart. The talks went on until 1:30 in the morning on the first day. They still hadn't finished talking. Then, on the second day, they continued the negotiations. Up until now, it's actually been 2 days of talks. So what's the current situation with the U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, after these negotiations? All right, let me first talk about the statement released by Pakistan. Pakistan and Qatar, which are the 2 intermediary countries, released a statement saying that after the negotiations, the talks concluded successfully and made encouraging progress. They have established a mechanism to promote technical meetings. Specifically, what does this mean? First, they have set up what's called a high-level committee to provide political-level oversight for the mediation process. The chief negotiators will regularly report to the high-level committee. I think this high-level committee definitely consists of representatives from the United States and Iran, along with the 2 intermediary countries. What should we call them? The facilitating countries? And then This high-level committee leads and focuses on 3 working groups. One discusses the so-called consensus topics, another deals with sanctions, and the third handles supervision, all to ensure that the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, and other matters can be effectively implemented. This high-level committee has already reached a consensus on a roadmap to finalize the agreement within 60 days. In addition, they have established what is called a communication hotline between each other to avoid accidents and misjudgments, ensuring that commercial ships can continue to safely pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Furthermore, both sides have set up a group called the Deconfliction Cell to put an end to military operations in Lebanon, because Lebanon is basically a powder keg right now. This group is specifically there to de-escalate, to reduce tensions, and these technical talks will continue for the rest of this week at a place called Birkenstock. It's a resort. This is a resort in Switzerland. It's not close to Geneva, nor is it near, Zermatt. What's the Chinese name for Zermatt? I suddenly forgot. Zermatt, yes. So that's where Vance met with Iran's chief negotiator, whose name is Jabbar. Galibaf left early while discussions continued. Iran reported significant progress, with Foreign Minister Arakchi noting the U.S. launched a $300 billion reconstruction plan and granted oil and petrochemical export exemptions. The blockade has been lifted, some frozen assets have been released, and a major reconstruction and development plan for Iran has been launched. But at this point, of course, some people are getting anxious. How can there be so many concessions on the very first day of negotiations? After all, this is what Arakchi said. He always speaks in a way that's favorable to himself. Well, that's just how negotiations work. Both sides use public statements to sway public opinion to their side. So what they say might not necessarily be true, especially when it comes to what Iran says. But he also mentioned that the first real test is in Lebanon with what's called the Conflict De-Escalation Group, which is the so-called first confliction cell I just mentioned. The real question is, how is this group actually functioning? All right, so last night, the talks in Shenzhen went on late into the night, and they picked up again this morning. So after these talks, there were two main outcomes. First, both sides did confirm and agree to keep the strait open, so the tension from Saturday has now passed. In addition, Iran agreed to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency in. Yes, the IAEA inspectors will be allowed back into the country to monitor and dismantle key parts of Iran's nuclear program. This is just a verbal agreement for now. The inspectors haven't actually entered yet. Another point is that the U.S. envoy Kushner, who is also Trump's son-in-law, reached an arrangement with Qatar to use Iran's already unfrozen funds to do what? To buy American agricultural products. These agricultural products will be supplied to the people of Iran. These 2 points have now been agreed upon, which is quite interesting. Of course, I will focus on discussing the issue of the unfrozen funds, because right now this is the biggest point of controversy. At least within the United States, it's the most hotly debated issue. How so? Because this memorandum, specifically Article 11 of the framework, states that the United States promises to make the restricted and frozen Iranian funds fully available. So when you read this wording, it really feels almost like surrender. Yeah, so this is also one of the main reasons why President Trump and Vance have been heavily criticized. The assets frozen outside of Iran, Iranian assets abroad, are widely estimated to be between 100 billion and 200 billion yuan. So where is this money sitting? It's sitting in accounts in countries like China, India, Iraq, and South Korea, because they're all under sanctions and can't touch it. If they do, they'll offend the United States, and the US will impose secondary sanctions on them, so nobody dares to move it. But right now, it seems that what Iran wants is just an initial amount of about $24 to $25 billion in frozen assets, and these assets are frozen. Well, part of it, $6 billion, is frozen in a bank account in Qatar. So Iran's President Raisi said that the $6 billion we have in Qatar will be returned to us. You see, when he says this will be returned, he means it. Trump once tried to deny Iran's right to these funds, the right to possess this money. But in his recent speech, he acknowledged these rights. What was he referring to? Well, Trump did say a few days ago, he said, "We took their money. That's not our money. It's theirs. We just froze it." Trump said, "At some point, I think we'll have to give it back." Sounds pretty American, huh? But notice that Trump wrote in his statement that any opportunity to access the funds would come with strict conditions. If Iran couldn't fulfill its commitments within the 60-day negotiation period, access would be restricted. Not a single cent would be given. Well, isn't that contradictory? So what's really going on? Are they giving the money or not? Does this $6 billion actually count or not? Is it real or not? Well, basically, that's how it is. The U.S. intention is to tie any release of funds to the step-by-step fulfillment of the agreement, just like they've said before. You have to earn your reward with good behavior, instead of granting immediate and unrestricted access, like a free pass or advance rights. But on Iran's side, they've been constantly emphasizing that they have sovereignty over the funds, that they have the right to use them. However, the U.S. insists that there must be additional conditions attached. So now, Iran doesn't dare to say outright what they want to do with this money. Are they going to use it to make weapons, right? So what they say is this roughly $25 billion will be used by Iran as funds to invest in rebuilding the country's infrastructure. So Iranian officials started talking a lot about things like roads, airports, transportation corridors, and projects that benefit ordinary Iranians. The United States is also quite pleased with this, basically just going along with the plan. The Americans say, yes, Iran cannot use any unfrozen assets to fund anything else. It must be used for humanitarian purchases, such as food or medicine, and other approved civilian purchases, not for funding terrorist organizations. So this batch of $6 billion can only be used for these purposes, rather than just handing the cash over to Tehran. American officials have warned that if Tehran violates the terms of this so-called agreement, the opportunity to access these funds will be revoked. So even though Iran claims it's using the money for people's livelihoods, in reality, it's saying one thing publicly and doing another privately. According to Reuters, Iran has already sent signals to Hezbollah, this has been caught by the media, saying that if Iran's cash flow improves, the increased financial resources might mean that funding to Hezbollah could resume. So this is what Iran is doing behind the scenes, and they've already been caught. As for U.S. Vice President Vance, he said today that the arrangement jointly developed with Qatari officials is as follows. The $6 billion in Iranian funds that were unfrozen will be used to purchase American agricultural products, including U.S. soybeans, corn, and wheat. He said that the U.S. has approval rights over this process, and Qatar also has approval rights. This setup is designed to ensure that the funds benefit ordinary Iranians, not the country's regime or its proxy organizations. Vance also attributed the confusion surrounding this proposal to comments on social media, saying that people are unclear about the facts and are making all sorts of random remarks. He said these comments misrepresent the agreement. Vance said that if Iran's assets are unfrozen, they will be used to make American farmers wealthier and at the same time help the Iranian people. Okay, what do you think? If that's the case, then what do you think should be done? All right, so during the 60-day ceasefire period, regarding whether or not to charge a toll for passing through the Strait of Hormuz, we all know that the memorandum states that there will be no tolls charged during those 60 days. After those 60 days, then it's up to them. They'll have to negotiate with Iran, Oman, and the Gulf countries. But here's something interesting. Today, President Trump tweeted about this. In his tweet, he said that during the 60-day ceasefire period, there will be no tolls charged for passing through the strait. Even after the 60 days are up, there still won't be any tolls unless the U.S. continues to act as the guardian angel for the countries in the Middle East. Only then, if we keep providing you with our services, will we charge tolls to cover the past, present, and future costs, which basically means military expenses. Thank you all for your attention to this matter. What he's implying is that after the MOU, since the MOU says there will be no tolls for 60 days, right? But what happens after that? It doesn't say. It doesn't say that they'll start charging afterward. It doesn't say that at all. It just says you can negotiate. So right now, Trump can't charge any tolls. That's why you see this MOU is really soft. But now, whether it's Vance or Trump, Vance's negotiations or Trump's tweets, they're both taking a hard stance. So the agreement itself is soft, but the stance is tough. I think this signing is really a bit like wanting both things at once. You can't really say they want it, but the other side doesn't think they want it either. They just brought them over to sign. Because all the tough stuff is based on terms that both sides agree to, or like you can't charge for 60 days and only after that can you negotiate. But after the negotiations, Trump just says you can't charge at all, so it's pretty interesting. Is this Trump's negotiation tactic? We'll have to watch for a while longer to see. This is also a kind of art of deal-making being played out on the world stage. Will this art ultimately produce results? Whether there will be results or not, we'll just have to wait and see. But I have my own opinion, which I'll share with everyone a bit later. All right. Meanwhile, from June 15th until now, in just 6 days, Iran has already exported 36 million barrels of crude oil. What does that mean? Y'all know that before the war, Iran's average daily oil exports were 2 million barrels. Now, in 6 days, they've shipped out 36 million barrels, which means they're averaging 6 million barrels a day. That means Iran's current crude oil exports are 3 times what they were before the war. And right now, Iran still has about 36 million barrels of crude oil floating in the Persian Gulf. Okay, so this shows just how badly Iran was lacking oil. Once the gates opened, it all came flooding out. That's how it is. Now, the U.S. Treasury Department has also announced that it has issued a so-called license authorizing Iran to produce, deliver, and sell. So for Iranian crude oil, petroleum products, and petrochemical products, you can probably guess how long the license is valid for. It's valid until August 21st, which is 60 days from now. What that means is, after 60 days, it's up in the air again. We'll revisit the issue. Basically, they're giving you 60 days to sell your oil. A friend of mine in the media asked me, isn't the US moving a bit too fast with this? But actually, this is pretty normal. If they didn't grant these so-called oil licenses, then the negotiations wouldn't even be able to get off the ground. I've told everyone before, when Iran's oil was under sanctions and there were no such oil licenses, Iran was basically just wandering around aimlessly. They were basically doing 2 things. First, using some really old rundown ships and turning off their signal lights, this so-called shadow fleet, to secretly transport and sell oil abroad. Second, they were only selling to the Chinese Communist Party, so they were still selling oil, but after getting the oil licenses, they no longer need to use the shadow fleet. They can load any kind of ship, even cruise ships if they want. Second, they no longer have to sell only to the Chinese Communist Party. Now, whoever pays the most can buy it. So this move actually strips the CCP of its right to get cheap Iranian oil. As we all know, earlier on, the CCP also got a large amount of oil from Venezuela, and it was almost not even at a discount. It was practically free because the CCP gave them a lot of aid. That means the deeply discounted oil is gone, and now the deeply discounted oil from Iran is also gone. That's really good for Iran, huh? So that's basically the situation. Now, let me share my thoughts. Basically, Vance really did what he said he would, because before we were always worried that the MOU was so loosely written, the wording of the MOU was so vague, but your statements were so firm. So in the end, does what you write count or does what you say count? So now it looks like Vance really did what he said he would. He didn't just give away money freely. Iran can get money, but it's for buying food and medicine, and specifically, it's for buying American food. If that's the case, then of course there won't be any problems, right? I mean, if you're buying American barley, wheat, corn, and things like that, you can't use those to make missiles, right? So of course there won't be any issues. As for what Iran's foreign minister said about the $300 billion investment already starting to rebuild, well, you have to look at what exactly is being rebuilt. If you're rebuilding the arms industry, building new warships, new missiles, or new nuclear bombs, that's one thing. But if you're just building a power plant or an oil refinery, that's something else entirely. So regarding this matter, it's clear that the US, at least in my opinion, based on my understanding of how the US government operates, will absolutely make sure that this $300 billion is only used by Iran to build civilian facilities. And besides, this money's released by the investors themselves. There's no way they'd let you take their money and use it to build missiles. If you use it to build missiles, how are you going to pay me back? My investments are supposed to have returns. Do missiles have returns? Missiles have the least return. Once you launch one, all that money just goes up in smoke, right? So that's the situation. And as for giving it to foreign agents, can you get your money back? Obviously not. Then some people say, like one of my influencer friends who debated with me, they say, if you give them $300 billion to build this or that, what if Iran gets rich? If Iran gets rich and then uses that money to build missiles and nuclear bombs, what do we do then? Well, you're not wrong. But no matter what, after this round of bombings, Iran has been set back 20 years. Set back 20 years. And another thing is, it's not just about giving Iran $300 billion and that's it. You know, back in 1979, Venezuela in 1999, both of them were the richest countries in the Middle East and South America, respectively. After these countries adopted socialism and established authoritarian regimes, their economies became entirely state-owned. As everyone knows, the vast majority of Iran's economy is state-owned, and you can see that it's doomed to fail. It really doesn't work. Iran, which used to be considered a major power in the Middle East, even one of the world's leading nations, ranked among the top 20 economies globally, has now dropped to nearly 50th place. So whose side is time really on? Hard to say, but time isn't on Iran's side. In 20 years, America will be stronger, and if Iran keeps declining, they'll have nothing left. Regardless, the problem is, how should we view President Trump's negotiations? This morning, I saw another perspective from a Chinese private citizen who said that the US was vowing to change the regime, but in the end, halfway through, it turned into the theory that America is surrendering. So how should we really look at this? Actually, my view is quite different from that of many Chinese friends, especially some of the more active, independent media personalities. I don't really see it the same way, because I think, to understand President Trump and his policies, you have to consider things from his perspective. That is, what is the American point of view? Since its founding, the US hasn't sought to change foreign governments. Take the 1830s Monroe Doctrine, which some now call the Trump Doctrine. It meant the Americas belonged to their own people, and European powers shouldn't meddle. Crucially, it also promised that the US wouldn't interfere in European chaos. Essentially, I don't interfere with you, so you don't interfere with me. We each mind our own business and build our own countries. And the founding ideal of the United States, to put it plainly, was to make America great. Not make America great again, that's today's slogan, but back then it was just make America great. What does that mean? It means that America would be a land of freedom. With a free system, they would build up America. If people from other countries were not convinced, then the approach was to cultivate culture and virtue to attract them. The American founding fathers had studied Confucius. Well, that's just a joke, of course they hadn't. But the idea is that America wanted to build itself into a shining beacon on a hill. so that everyone would admire it from afar, looking up to it with genuine respect. It's like, even if you can't reach it, your heart still yearns for it. The idea was for everyone to learn from America. America has started very few wars. There was the conflict with Mexico, but that was during its nation building. Once completed, do you know what happened in World War I? The US stayed neutral throughout. In the end, it was when Germany attacked and sank a British ship called the Lusitania. Yes, the Lusitania. And there were over 100 American passengers on board. These Americans died when the ship went down. Now, that was a special reason, but there was another reason too. At that time, Germany was trying to bribe Mexico, to collude with Mexico. They wanted to attack the United States, which is what angered America and led to its involvement in World War II. As everyone knows, Churchill came to the United States several times, risking his life to cross the Atlantic and ask Roosevelt to join the war. But Roosevelt couldn't enter the war, because the United States simply didn't want to go to war, didn't want to get involved in European affairs until Pearl Harbor. After the Pearl Harbor incident, it was Nazi Germany. Hitler declared war on the United States because his ally, Japan, had started fighting with America. If Hitler hadn't declared war, it's hard to say whether the United States would have joined the European theater at all. So in a way, Hitler was acting on impulse, or you could say he lost his head. That's how it happened. So the United States really doesn't get involved in wars easily. There are plenty of examples where America started fighting and then pulled back halfway, aren't there? Right? The Korean War, the war in Korea stopped halfway through. In Vietnam, they withdrew their troops halfway. In the first Gulf War, after George H.W. Bush achieved a great victory, they also pulled out. And last June, with Operation Midnight Hammer, the U.S. was also successful. After bombing Iran, they stopped right there. At that time, Israel was all fired up and wanted to keep fighting, but President Trump said, no more, we're stopping. They fought for just 12 days and then it was over. So it's pretty common for the US to start a war and then stop. That's much more typical than the image of invading Afghanistan or Iraq. Those invasions are actually exceptions. So the United States really doesn't want to go around changing foreign governments. So when this war started, Trump also said, this is the opportunity for the Iranian people. He didn't say this is our opportunity as Americans. Since the Iranian people, under the current circumstances, aren't able to rise up, Trump isn't going to abandon America's usual way of doing things just because of that statement. In other words, he's not going to go and change the regime. Regime change has never really been the main focus of American foreign policy. Because there are just too many countries in the world. How many can you really change? The idea is that we should take care of America itself, build ourselves up, and use our own strength, prosperity, civilization, and success to convince the world. For those tormented by this regime, it's heartbreaking. Like the Iranians, it's the same for the Chinese. Their disappointment in Trump is understandable, but he's the US president. To truly understand him, you must see things from the American perspective. Moreover, everyone is responsible for themselves. Should Americans be responsible for China's future? That's unrealistic. China's future is its own responsibility, just like Taiwan's. As they say, heaven helps those who help themselves. So that's how it is, right? Wasn't the collapse of the Soviet Union also caused by the people of the Soviet bloc themselves? Didn't they bring it upon themselves, right? So I think we shouldn't expect too much from this. If Trump can realize that the Chinese Communist Party can never go from being the world's second to being the world's number one, if the Chinese Communist Party ends up being besieged from all sides around the world, and that makes the Chinese people start to question whether the path we're on is the right one, that's already a good thing. I think the real way to change China has to come from the Chinese people themselves. All right, next, let's talk about the resignation of the British Prime Minister. Where is the UK headed now? The British Prime Minister, named Starmer, announced today that he will resign from his position as Prime Minister. He said that after realizing he could no longer unite the Labour Party, he decided to step down as both Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party. So what about the new leader? The new leader will take office before the House of Commons reconvenes in September. He said, I will continue to serve as Prime Minister and oversee the completion of the election. I will do everything I can until the new Prime Minister takes over. I will do everything I can to ensure a smooth transfer of power. Actually, President Trump already called this out yesterday afternoon. In a post on Truth Social on Sunday, he said that Starmer is about to step down. He said Starmer will resign. As for the position of British Prime Minister, he has failed badly on two very important issues. One is immigration, and the other is energy prices, specifically opening up North Sea oil. He said, I wish him good luck. But are these really the reasons? We'll talk about that in a bit. Let's first discuss the most direct and obvious reason, the one everyone agrees on. The Labour Party suffered a crushing defeat in the local elections in early May. They lost 1,500 council seats and control of 25 councils nationwide, meaning the control of the councils in these 25 cities. When Starmer first took office 11 months ago, his public approval rating was 5%. What does that mean? It means the percentage of people who approved minus those who disapproved was 5%. By last November, it had dropped to negative 46%. The positive minus the negative became a negative 46 percentage points. By this January, it was negative 57 percentage points. In other words, in January of this year, 75% of people disapproved of Starmer and only 18% approved of him. So 75 minus 18 equals negative 57. If you look at it now, it's probably even worse than negative 57. It can't be contained anymore. Let's talk about why. First, let's talk about the local elections. The Reform Party, led by Farage, achieved major gains in its strongholds. This has been described as an earthquake-level phenomenon. It's a huge victory for a new right-wing party in the UK. As for the more left-leaning Green Party, they also managed to take some seats from Labour in urban areas. So Labour is facing vote stealing from both sides, and they just can't stop it. As a result, because, in the UK, the Prime Minister is chosen by the majority party in Parliament, not by direct election. If your party isn't happy with you, or if you cause the party to suffer losses, then you're done for. So this has led to a governance crisis for the Labour Prime Minister. Starmer has actually been holding out for almost 2 months, right? From early May until now. During this period, 7 of his own ministers have resigned. They quit. They don't want to play along with him anymore. In addition, more than 80 Labour MPs have publicly called for Starmer to resign. About 1/3 of them are centrists, and the other 2/3 come from the left wing of the Labour Party. Whether they're from the soft left or the hard left, basically all the big names in the party have spoken out. Even the foreign secretary started putting pressure on him the day before yesterday. His own foreign secretary told him, "You should step down." So in the end, Starmer just couldn't hold on by himself and had no choice but to step down. So before this, since this is an election, right, there were 3 things that really dealt him a heavy blow. One of them was in December 2024 when he appointed someone named Peter Mandelson as the ambassador to the United States. So what happened? Well, he didn't pass the security check by the British intelligence agency, but he was still forcibly put in the position. In the end, it turned into a mess. Last September, it was discovered that he had close ties with Epstein, who had already been convicted. So a scandal broke out and they had no choice but to get rid of him, to remove him from his position. In addition, his chief of staff acted as a scapegoat for him, saying, "It was all my fault." The chief of staff was also forced to resign. In that same month, his deputy prime minister, Angela Rayner, also resigned due to a tax scandal. Of course, it turned out that this tax issue was actually a minor thing. It was just a mistake made when paying taxes, an oversight when buying a house for his son. It wasn't intentional tax evasion. But regardless, this still dealt a big blow to his reputation. And to make matters worse, the most recent incident was how he handled President Trump's war with Iran. At first, he refused the U.S. request to use British bases for military action against Iran, which led President Trump to publicly criticize him. On March 3rd, Trump even publicly said, "We're not dealing with Winston Churchill here." Afterwards, under pressure, he approved limited defensive cooperation with the U.S., but as a result, he angered the anti-war faction within his own party. So in the end, he satisfied neither side. At the same time, he also failed to appease those critics who accused him of lacking leadership. So he ended up getting criticized from both sides. When someone can't stand firm on their own position, this is what happens. Trying to please both sides, but getting scolded by both. Nothing worked out. So now things have turned out like this. As a result, he was forced to step down in disgrace. So who's next? Reportedly, there are 3 contenders, but most likely it'll be just one, this person named Burnham. So who is Burnham? This Burnham, his full name is Andy Burnham, and he is the mayor of Manchester, England. So then, well, since they need to find a new prime minister, he's seen as a strong candidate. So there's a constituency northwest of Manchester called Makerfield. The member of parliament for Makerfield resigned, which means there needs to be a by-election in Makerfield. Burnham was just elected, so it's basically like someone stepped aside to let him enter the House of Commons, because in the UK, the Prime Minister must be a member of the House of Commons. So in this way, the path was cleared for him. Originally, a possible competitor, the former health secretary named Wes Streeting, also publicly expressed his support for Burnham yesterday, saying, "I'm not running, just let him have it." That's the situation, so now things have turned out like this. So basically, it's highly likely that Burnham will become the new Prime Minister of the UK, although it's not completely settled yet. It's very likely to happen.